Good morning, friends. I say good morning because sit down here, Bobs. Those of you that are watching know my dog always wants to get in on the game as soon as he hears me start talking. I'm starting today's talk a little earlier. It's about 10:30 here on the East Coast of the United States as opposed to noon. I just have a busy day, but I wanted to give this talk before I left the area. So sit down, Bobs. My talk today is on the Malunkyaputta Sutta, or the Malunkyovada. It's known both ways. And this sutta is similar to the talks I've been giving the last few weeks on first the Vacchagotta Sutta and last week on the Anurata Sutta. And all of these suttas, and there's many more than these, I've chosen these three and actually one more to make a specific point of how these great existential questions that have been, as an awakened human being, see them just a distraction to awakening, but with the insistence that any useful or authentic so-called spiritual system should be able to provide an answer to these questions, and which is really what religions try to do. They try to answer these great questions that I talked about the last few weeks, and I'll mention a few more of them today. So as I think there's a twofold reason. One is altruistic, even though it's misinformed, to provide comfort to people whose minds are agitated by not knowing the answer. So speculative answers are provided to distract the mind away from realizing even the questions themselves are rooted in ignorance. And then it provides legitimacy to the religion, that if you can make declarative statements that God is this, or heaven is this, or the afterlife is this, or even declarative statements that there is no such thing, because the Buddha and an awakened human being, and any awakened human being will see this, that even the attempt to answer these questions is rooted in ignorance. And again, this is just another sutta that reflects this in a slightly different way. Malunkyaputta is a member of the Sangha. He's been meditating in seclusion. And David asked a good question and brought up a very good point, that he noticed that these three suttas and many of the other ones, the central actor is either a wanderer or someone living in seclusion, and which points to the need for, and this is the point that David brilliantly made last night, that in order to continue to develop their Dhamma, they had to come and join again with the Sangha and learn from the Buddha, or a teacher that actually understands the Dhamma. And that kind of points to an underlying theme of all of these, that if you're going to learn what an awakened human being taught, you can't learn from a teacher who didn't study what the Buddha actually taught, or what is commonly called today as Buddhism, which most of the Buddhist traditions have very little to do with what the Buddha actually taught. I'm not putting them down. If a careful examination clearly shows there's been so many adaptations, accommodations, and embellishments made to the Buddha's original teachings, that what has developed is not nearly as effective or focused as the Buddha taught. And the subtitle I gave to the Malunkyaputta Sutta is Staying Focused, because it's a way of developing the Dhamma without getting distracted by these great questions or the powerful influence of who we're associating with. And in that, when we're associating ourselves with reasonable people, but who are deluded because of their own ignorance of what the Buddha taught, it's easy to take on this air of indifference, which the Buddha actually recognized as one of the hindrances that many people conveniently ignore, because it allows them to be indifferent to what the Buddha actually taught, while taking on the air of a Buddhist practitioner. And most modern Buddhist practitioners, because there's so many different presentations, I would simply pick and choose aspects that they'd like to develop that doesn't threaten them in any way, and also that their friends and associates are doing, rather than actually as someone developing the Dhamma, actually looking at what the Buddha taught And even that is often dismissed today as, well, it's impossible to know what the Buddha taught. And, the Sutta Pitaka is treated kind of like the Bible, that it's just full of metaphor and analogy and speculation and mystical and magical teachings. Well, that's not true of the Sutta Pitaka. It's certainly true of the Abhidhamma, but that's not something that the Buddha taught. Okay, let me get into this sutta. I don't have a lot of time today. I just want to read the parts of the sutta and then kind of relate it to what's going on in the world today, and then, and again, obviously relate it back to how to teach the Dhamma. So I gave you the intro on Malunkyaputta. He was sitting in seclusion, and those great existential came to his mind, and he decided that these questions were much more, getting answers to these questions is so important to him, and it would prove that the Buddha was who he claimed to be, an awakened human being, and had something useful to teach him. And so he decided that if the Buddha can answer these questions, fine, I'll continue to follow him. If he does not answer these questions or cannot, I'll leave the Sangha. And so those questions that came up in his mind and that he put to the Buddha is the typical existential questions. Is the cosmos eternal or not eternal? Is the cosmos finite or infinite? Does the body have a soul or not? And this is that reconciliation point that most, that a logical mind rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths eventually has to get to, because you cannot reconcile existential questions, such as whether I exist or do not exist, without this final reconciliatory soup that is often put it this way. Does an awakened person exist after death? Or do they not exist after death? Or do they both exist and not exist? Or neither of these? And that reconciliatory soup is the only possible result of thinking rooted in ignorance that has to reconcile these beliefs with its own views and the views of those around us. So we come to this kind of idea, which is really all it is. It's an idea, it's an ideology, that we are all one great cosmic being. We're all evolving at the same rate. We're all going to the same place. And essentially, we're all one being, which is not something that the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught to see the discreteness in the arising and passing away of all phenomena, including the phenomena that we think and identify as us. And anything beyond that is going to prove to be simply a distraction. So the Buddha answers. Malunkyaputta says to the Buddha, if you can answer these questions based on your knowing, I will remain a disciple. If you cannot answer these questions because you don't know, I will leave the Sangha. The Buddha responds, Malunkyaputta, did I ever tell you or even imply that my teaching would answer these questions or that these questions deserve an answer? And Malunkyaputta says no. Well, then why are you claiming a grievance or making a demand of me? And that's an important thing. When as someone who's developing the Dhamma, most of us will also have this skillful desire that we'd like to share what we know, because we realize how important these teachings are. But we have to not, as teachers or merely presenters of the Dhamma, meaning we're just talking to our friends now, we need to overcome the need to provide answers just because people are putting questions to us. Because as the Buddha is showing here, that need to provide answers to every thought, word, and idea that might occur to in our own minds, or that others are throwing at us, or maybe not throwing, or just requesting of us, is just falling into that existential trap. So the Buddha says, why are you making, he's been very clear. He's very consistent. One of the things that I found most remarkable when reading the Sutta Pitaka is the incredible consistency of the Buddha's teachings over 45 years. It never wavers from the context of dependent origination of Four Noble Truths. And so the Buddha can say, why are you making a grievance of me? I never brought these things up. I never said I would answer these questions. And I never claimed that the Dhamma, my Dhamma, I'm speaking as the Buddha now, that my Dhamma would answer these questions. And the reason is because they're completely irrelevant to what I'm teaching. It would be like going to school for, going to med school, but as a prerequisite, you have to learn how to change the oil in a car. Why would you do that? It's completely irrelevant to what you're doing. It may be something useful. It may be a a useful life skill if you ever find yourself in need of changing your oil, but it doesn't help you in any way to understand the practice of medicine. And so it would be irrelevant for a school curriculum to include auto mechanics in a class that is designed to teach medicine. Yet that is what we try to do, because we want to have this all-encompassing Buddhism or even religion that answers all these questions. Well, the Buddha, you can't answer these questions. You can't answer questions effectively if the questions themselves are rooted in ignorance. It can only lead to further distraction. So then the Buddha continues, if you threaten to leave the Sangha, unless these questions are answered by me, then leave the Sangha. And it really is that simple. The Buddha is, remember the context, the Buddha is talking to someone who does understand the Dhamma. He understands that Malunkyaputta is at a point in his development where he needs a direct teaching, and he needs something rather strong and forceful to get past the ignorance that he's holding on to by making these demands. And so the Buddha is kind of hitting him between the eyes with this, and he's doing it out of compassion. He's saying you need to make a choice now, that if your insistence on having these questions answered will continue to block you from developing the Dhamma. So if you continue that way, on that route, you might as well lead the Sangha, because what he's teaching, what an awakened human being is teaching, is going to be of absolutely no benefit. The Buddha continues, you are like a man who has been wounded by a poisonous arrow. His friends brought him to a surgeon, but they refused to have the arrow removed until they know who shot the arrow, their position, their physical attributes, and even what type of bow they use. They further delay the action that will save them by insisting on knowing what type of animal the arrow feathers were made of and the type of wood it is composed of. All of these questions have nothing to do with the matter of hand, saving the man's life. Saving their life. They will die never knowing the answers to these foolish questions, which only prove to be a distraction from what is most important. Again, the metaphor of being hit, being injured by an arrow, relates to our own contributions to our ignorance. We're continually hurting ourselves that way, and by insisting on having these great answers, the answers to these great questions before we'll proceed with developing our own awakening is going to prove deadly in this case. In other words, we're going to die without the opportunity to develop awakening as the Buddha describes awakening. Whatever your view, the Buddha continues, whatever your view is of these questions, the right view is dukkha occurs. Craving originates and clinging perpetuates dukkha. Cessation of this process is possible, and the Eightfold Path is the path developing cessation. The Buddha's taking a confused Malunkyaputa's mind, who's stuck in these great questions, literally stuck. And by not even engaging with why those questions are irrelevant, he simply turns Malunkyaputa's mind to the Four Noble Truths, which is what he does consistently through 45 years. And we must remember that everything the Buddha taught for his 45-year teaching career was taught in the context of Four Noble Truths and dependent origination. Excuse me. And anything that would incline our minds away from developing and embracing the Four Noble Truths as a reality of our life is simply a distraction. So again, the Buddha's placing over and over and over again throughout his teachings the importance of developing profound understanding of Four Noble Truths. In other words, ending ignorance of Four Noble Truths through developing the Eightfold Path. It's all the Buddha ever taught. And to many people today who have built this grand, all-inclusive Buddhism that includes all kinds of things that the Buddha never taught, we'll look at it and say that's so limited. And many people, I've had people in my own Sangha, and they have left the Sangha, that would always ask the question or insist that if the Buddha was alive today, he would certainly teach a different Dhamma. But even that view is rooted in ignorance, and it's an ignorance that can only come from not examining what an awakened human being taught. The point that I'm trying to make is if you want to dismiss or develop indifference to what the Buddha taught, you should at least I mean, and you owe it to yourself. It doesn't matter really to anyone else. You should at least develop what the Buddha actually taught. And how do you do that? It's not easy today because most Buddhism is presented in a way that bears very little resemblance to what the Buddha taught. And I spent many, many years wandering around in ever deepening confusion, being a well-dedicated Buddhist practitioner. What I found was I was studying and practicing something that the Buddha never taught, and hence I simply got more confused and more frustrated. So the Buddha continues, I do not answer these questions as they are not fundamental with the goal of awakening. They do not develop disenchantment, dispassion, with calming, with unbinding, with direct knowledge, with awakening. This is why I do not answer these questions. Again, the Buddha did not grow up in a vacuum. He certainly didn't grow up in a mind that was unaware of what was going on around him. In fact, because of his awakened state, he was profoundly aware of what was occurring around him and the environment in which he was teaching the Dhamma in. And that's one of the reasons why he developed, one of the reasons, it's the Eightfold Path was developed to avoid what he saw during his time and common to our time, the need for distraction, even within so-called spiritual practices. In fact, the spiritual practices that he studied with some of the foremost teachers, Alara Kalama and Udeka Ramaputta come to mind, but there were others, and he rejected those as simply not leading to the goal of understanding the nature of suffering. And so the Buddha then continues, I do make it very clear that dukkha occurs, craving originates, and clinging continues dukkha. Cessation of this process is possible, and the Eightfold Path develops cessation. Again, he's reinforcing the Four Noble Truths. And then he concludes this by saying, I make this very clear for one purpose. This develops disenchantment, dispassion, with calming, with unbinding, and with direct knowledge. It develops awakening. This is why I teach the Dhamma. Always remember, Malunkyaputta, what I teach and what I do not teach. That's one of the most important lines the Buddha ever taught. It's what every follower of the Buddhist teachings, notice I didn't say every Buddha should follow, although they should, but everyone who wants to develop what the Buddha is teaching should remember that line. What he taught and why, and what he did not teach, because that last line is as important as what he was teaching. To understand what the Buddha taught, if we're to develop the Eightfold Path and not fall into the hindrances. Lorna brought up such an important point last night about how she's starting to see how this the difficulty with the Dhamma or developing the Dhamma relates directly to the hindrances. And the hindrances are something that are often discounted and hardly ever talked about, or they're talked about in terms of almost like the Ten Commandments, like they're sins. The hindrances are put in place because were developed and taught by the Buddha because they are actual hindrances. And so you can see that the need to accommodate or embellish the Buddhist Dhamma is easily reflected in the hindrances, such as the need for constant sensory involvement, meaning that the Dhamma itself isn't stimulating enough, and so I need something else that will keep me interested. Well, the Buddhist teachings is about not keeping our minds continually stimulating, but developing a peaceful and calm mind. Another aspect of the hindrances that is often comes into play here is indifference. If we're diminishing or embellishing or accommodating the Buddha's Dhamma in any way, it's because we are indifferent to what an awakened human being taught. And that can only lead to further ignorance, because the motivation behind the need to accommodate or embellish the Buddha's Dhamma must be rooted in ignorance if we understand what the Buddha taught. The sutta concludes with, having heard these words, Malunkyaputta was satisfied and went on his way. The question came up last night. So did he stay with the Sangha? He did. Malunkyaputta did stay with the Sangha and did develop the Dhamma to an awakened state. That's the end of the sutta. The other one thing I wanted to touch on, I mentioned this maybe even a few months ago, that I like these Wednesday talks to be topical to what's going on in the world in a way I usually don't get into at our Sangha, or also something that that questions from students, or maybe even a general discussion within the Sangha. And so quite a few students and people who were just inquiring about the Buddha's Dhamma have been having a great difficulty in practicing the Dhamma. In fact, the question is, if the world is in such a mess and such a turmoil, and there's so many things going on, that I couldn't possibly meditate now, much less develop the entire Eightfold Path. And of course, the answer of that lies in the Dhamma too. The world is in turmoil, but the world has always been in turmoil. And the argument could be made that it's in much more turmoil, it's much more chaotic today, and it may or may not be. The degrees don't matter. What does matter for a Buddhist practitioner is to remember that dukkha occurs, and that includes everything that's going on in the world. It mostly includes our elected officials and unelected officials, but it includes each and every one of us on the planet today. If we believe the Buddhist Dhamma, and then we understand that if we haven't developed the Buddhist Dhamma and are still rooted in ignorance, we can't expect much difference than chaos, because dukkha occurs. And it's craving that originates, and clinging that perpetuates dukkha. So craving usually can be seen from a clear mind in the ideologies that we profess and hold on to. And so that it's clear that, now I'm just talking about our country, not worldwide, but it certainly can be seen worldwide, globally. That's seen in the extreme views from one political party or another, both insisting that their views are the only right view, and then going to such extremes to damage people that might hold another view. And obviously it's going on from both sides, all sides. Excuse me. But the middle way of the Eightfold Path, which is what the Buddha taught, he said, I teach a middle way to avoid extreme views. By developing the middle way, we are able to be within the turmoil and the chaos of the world, and being mindfully present. Again, the Buddha didn't teach a Dhamma that we could stick our heads in the sand. That idea that we are all one great cosmic being, this great reconciliatory soup, is the way that we stick our head in the sand, even though it's the way so-called New Age people that consider themselves advanced, will take great refuge in the idea of this universal cosmic being. It's just an excuse from seeing things as they really are. It's a palliative to our own confused minds, rather than realizing that those are extreme views, and to find the middle way. How do we find the middle way? The Buddha taught the Eightfold Path specifically as the middle way between those extreme views. By developing the Eightfold Path, we're able to live in the world, but not be of the world. And we can live in the world in a much more effective way when our minds aren't distracted by our own ideology and reacting to the ideologies that we don't agree with. We'll be able to see things much more clearly. That's the whole point of the Buddhist Dhamma. Another way of saying we'll be able to see things much more clearly is we'll be able to develop right view. The Buddha describes right view as a profound understanding, a penetrative understanding of the nature of dukkha. Dukkha occurs. Thank you for listening today. If you find benefit from this talk, please consider a donation at becoming-buddha.com. Thank you. Peace.